right, good morning, everybody. This is Terry from the Des Moines User Group. Thanks for jumping on today's call. We are doing another Let's Get Flowing, and we have Michelle Hansen with us again for this presentation. And if you remember the last one she led, she's fantastic, awesome, and just all those other good things that you could say about her. She leads the Cedar Rapids User Group and is also a lightning champion for the product. So happy to have her here, and I will turn it over to her in just a moment, but let me run through my slides here real quick just to give you an idea where we've been. So we've started all these sessions back at the first of the year. We've gotten through 4 of those. We are now on the one here for Michelle. Carissa, I don't know for sure, are you planning on leading our October 13th one?
I am planning to lead that, yes.
Okay, perfect. Clarissa is also another fantastic flow user, and we'll learn a lot, I'm sure, from her on the 13th. I've added one more new one. I'm calling it a bonus session. If you were at our user group meeting last time around on the Terry's Tidbit section, we very quickly talked through this, but I want to go into it in a little bit greater detail on how you might move process builders over to record trigger flows. So added that in November. We typically we're holding November open on hopes of Dreamforce perhaps being an option. We've heard nothing yet about Dreamforce, whether it's canceled or whether it's going to be remote. We know it's not going to be in person. So I did want to at least get something on the calendar for November for us as well. So we will work through record trigger flows as a bonus session at the end of this process. So with that, our use case for today's presentation is Jones Insurance wants their customer service team to call policy owners 2 weeks after a claim is closed. Claims are managed in a custom object in the org that we're going to be using, and there's a close date field on that object that allows us to identify whether or not we are 14 days after it's been closed. So to accomplish this, we're going to use a scheduled flow to find claims and create cases. So since customer service is the ones making the calls, they want to have these as a case record. The flow should run nightly, and assign the cases will be assigned to the customer service queue. So that's our use case for today. And Michelle's going to cover these particular topics, possibly in this order, maybe not in this order, but we're going to look at constants. That's a new item that we have not yet hit, the use of constants. Getting records, we've done that, I think, before, how to retrieve records from Salesforce. Global variables, maybe we've used, I don't remember for sure, but we are definitely using them in this one, as well as global actions. Global actions is the first time we've addressed that particular topic in these sessions. And of course, debugging and then activating the flow. So without any further talk from me, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. I'll let you share your screen and we will kick this off.
All right, let me make sure I pick the appropriate screen here. Good morning, everyone. I'm so thrilled you're here, and I'm thrilled to be here with you. I am a Flownatic, and I love talking about flow, so this is right in my wheelhouse. Okay, so can someone confirm that you can see Salesforce and we're on the all claims?
Yeah, we are.
Okay. Perfect. So again, with our use case, what we're wanting to do is we want to go out and we want to make sure that if a case closed 2 weeks ago, that we're creating a case to follow up. So what I did is I just pulled up a list of our claims here, because what I like to do with things like this is spot check to see if I actually have records that meet the criteria, to see if the flow will actually run. And so today's the 15th. So 2 weeks ago would have been September 1st. So I do actually have 3 cases here with a close date of September 1st, which should meet our criteria. So that is fantastic. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to jump over here into claims. And I'm showing you this custom object for one reason, and that is because when we get into Flow Builder, You'll see how we start querying for dates. We have to hard code in an actual date, which doesn't work very well if I need this to be dynamic and run every day or every week for a different date, unless you really want part of your admin's job to be going in, changing the date in your flow, saving a new version of it, remembering to activate it so it runs on the schedule it's supposed to. Hands up for anybody who wants to do that. Didn't think so. So what we did instead is we built a formula field on the claim object to do the logic for us. And so it's really pretty simple. It's just a checkbox. And we used Terry's naming convention so that we can see this is a formula field that's going to show up in a flow. And so what we want to know is the close date plus 14, 2 weeks, days, equal to today. And if that is actually the case, it will check the box as true and we'll be good to go. So again, if we jump in here into one of these actual records, we'll see if it's on the page layout. It's not on the page layout. Darn it. Should have checked that beforehand. This is what I get for demoing live, right? Okay, so next up, we want to assign it to a queue. So just in case anyone isn't familiar with queues, I just wanted to show you where it is. It's under users in setup. So we've built the customer service queue here. If you go in here, you can see it supported on the case object, and Terry is our entire queue. So good job, Terry. You're gonna have a lot of follow-up to do today.
I'll be busy.
Okay, so now we're gonna jump over into Flow Builder. And so this is actually a really simple flow. There's only 2 things that we actually need it to do, because most of the heavy lifting is happening up here in this start object. So when you actually build a new flow and you have a blank canvas, if you double click into the start, you can actually come in here and set some different things. So for a scheduled flow, which is the type that we selected, it asks you to set a schedule. And so we want this to run every day, and we're gonna run it at 11 o'clock at night, so everything's ready for the following morning. You have options for frequency. You can run it once. So this is actually a great option for an alternative to Process Builder. If you ever had something where you always had to go back and there was like something you needed to update on a bunch of fields and you wanted to use Process Builder for it, but to trigger a record change, you had to go in and data load a checkbox or something really obnoxious like that. I've done that a few times. I hated it. I almost would rather do the updates by hand, but when it's thousands of records, it's like I can't spend the time. This is a great use case for setting a schedule of once. I need you to go find all the records that meet this criteria and run a flow over them, and it doesn't force us to data load a record change to make that process fire. Okay, so we can run it once, we can run it every day, or we can run it once a week. Then it's gonna ask you, okay, what do you want me to run this on? So here is where we go in and we determine the object that we're looking for and the requirements. So I'm just gonna show you here. If I add a condition for close dates, and I enter a value, it defaults to showing me I need a month, a day, and a year. So again, that's just how it looks when it's hard coded. So you absolutely can't put a relative date in here. And that's why we went with the formula field. So what we want to do is we want to find any records where that checkbox has been checked, so it equals true. And that's what we're actually going to have this flow run on. Now, Flow in the background is smart enough to know that you're probably going to have more than one record that actually meets this criteria. And what it does is it actually starts individual flow interviews for every single one of those records, but on the back end, it's bulkified so that it does it in batches of 200 records at a time. So we only have 3, it's only gonna run 3 times, but if you had 3,000, for example, it would run in batches of 200 until you got all of them through the process. Okay, so we have our claim. We know we want the follow-up date checkbox logic to be true. So then the next thing that we need to do is we need to find the related customer service queue that we built. So we're gonna do a get records, and we're gonna come in here, and basically it's a group. And so there are 2 groups in here. One's a collaboration group, and that's your chatter group. And then you have your group, which is your queues. And if I remember correctly, it's also your public groups. So you want to make sure you pick the right group in here. Then you can specify the name and the type, so that way it narrows it down from all of your public groups to just looking for your queues. And then Salesforce has done a lot to really make it easier for admins to learn flow. It used to be you had to declare a variable for every field on that record that you wanted, and we're like, that's way too hard. So now, because we're looking for one specific record, we're only going to pull back one, so only the first record that it finds that matches. And we're going to tell Salesforce, just store everything in that record for me. And then behind the scenes, Salesforce is smart enough to know what you're using out of that record to just query those fields. So if you have 400 fields on an object and you say get all fields, and you only use 10 of them, it's not actually going to take the processing power to store all 400 fields. The nice thing about this is that if I'm using 10 fields out of those 400 and I modify my flow to use another 10 of them, instead of having to remember to go back and declare variables to store all 10 of those fields or indicate that all 10 of those fields need to be added, Salesforce does it for me automatically. And I can tell you that I got bit by this a couple weeks ago, where I went back and modified an older flow, and I'm so used to seeing this that I forgot to tell my flow that I had a new field involved, and it completely errored out on me and was like, I don't know what you want me to do with this. And I'm like, that's because I forgot to tell you, didn't I? So I am definitely a fan of this automatically store all fields whenever you can use it. I have not yet gone back to update all of my old flows to use it. I'll let you know what I decide to do on that. If I get bored someday, I might, but it's a lot of refactoring for, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, so now we are going to create the case. And before we jump into that, I know that we have a new element that we're using called a constant. So if we go over to our manager and we can see our resources, we have constants. Now, a variable essentially is a bucket that you can put something in, and you can change what's in that bucket back and forth. So, you know, maybe I want to change the value of a name from ABC to XYZ. A variable allows you to make that change, and you can make assignments to a variable to do that. A constant, by definition, is something that remains constant the whole time. It does not change. So there are some things that we've done with this. We actually have built 3. So the first one is a constant for case status, because we know every time we create a case through this flow, we want it to default to new status. Next, case subject. We want a standard case subject every single time we create one of these. So again, we created a constant. It's a type of text again. It just says claim follow-up. So every time we create a case, it's going to have the same value of claim follow-up for the subject. Then finally, the last constant we put in here is the flow name. And so what I just did is I came up here and I looked at the name of my flow and put it in a constant, and I will show you why we're going to use this in a little bit, but this is one of Michelle's tidbits. If I can steal Terry's Terry's trademark. And this is something that I use to help my users and me troubleshoot quite a bit within the org when it comes to flows. Okay, so now that we've had all our constants declared, things that we know are not going to change, we go into our action. Now this is actually pulling from a global action. And you'll notice that we very intentionally put something in here that's got a missing flag on it. So what happened is we created a global action. We pulled that global action into our flow to use it, and then we modified the global action, and now we have a mismatch between what's in that action and what is in that action within my flow. So if we jump over to global actions real quick, we can see that I have a create a case action that is a flow version. And if I look at the layout, I've got name, status, subject, description, case owner type, and then was it created by an automated process? And if so, what is that automated process's name? This is Michelle's little tidbit. Every time I have a piece of automation, whether it's a process or a flow that creates a record, on that object, I go build these 2 fields. Number 1, created by automated process as a checkbox, and number 2, a text field for automated process name. And as part of that automation, I fill out those two fields. So that way, if someone has a question, because the user that actually triggers this automation is going to be the created by user for the most part, this will actually prove that this happened as part of an automation. So you can then go back and troubleshoot exactly what happened or what they triggered that created this particular record. Now, if we go back and we compare this to the flow builder, I've got my name, I've got my type, I've got my contact ID. What I don't have here is my claim number that I want to associate this to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over here to my global action, find my claim number, and we're just going to put it right down here and do a quick save on that. Okay. So actually going to cancel out of this because now we're going to need to refresh this page so that it can pick up what we changed in our global action. All right, so quick refresh done. Now if we go back in here, you notice that my claim is no longer missing and it's still tied to this record ID. That's the next thing that we're going to talk about, but real quick, I want to make sure that we go in here and we put in global constant true. And I'm going to, all right, I think we've got everything else filled out correctly. Okay, so this $ record concept is kind of weird. It's a system variable. And so by system variable, what I mean is if we go in and we create anything, a system variable is something that Salesforce has already put together for us because it understands the structure of the background and how things are going to work. So if we jump back into the action, actually, this is a good thing where we can see global constant true has that $ in front of it. That is a system constant or a global constant, actually, that means anywhere you use this in your Salesforce org, this is true in a true false sense, as a, you know, it's used for checkboxes or toggles or anything like that. It has to either be true or false. And if you type in the word true, you can do that, but it sees it as text as opposed to using the global constant true, which is checkbox true, if that makes any sense. So what this does is it's a placeholder for the record that's running through this particular flow. So usually when we're building a flow, we would have passed in something from Process Builder like a record ID. And so that record ID is another kind of system variable. It's a reserved variable that if you use the record ID with the capital R, the capital I, and the lowercase d, it knows that what we're asking for is the ID of the record from wherever we were when we launched this. So it gives it context. What this does is we're saying we're going to feed you a batch, but this batch is dynamic and we don't know what's going to be in it from day to day. So we need something to tell you that whatever record you found, this is what I want you to work on. And that's what $ record is all about. So again, if we look back in here, we started this on the claim object. So the claim is our object or our record. So it's $record.id. So if we were to have written this ourselves, it would be basically claim.id. Same thing with the contact ID. If we go look at that claim, the claimant field would be on that claim record. So we've replaced that with the $ record. So it's not a specific record ID or anything like that. So for every one of these records that we go through, that's what it's actually going to be working on. Now, because we actually had to go get the customer service queue to find its ID, this is what we're using down here. And it's actually referencing this get customer service queue as the action where we went and got it. So if we open this up again and you look at the title, it's get _ customer service queue, dot, then the field that we wanted to pull back from it. So that's another way that flow is kind of becoming easier. You don't have to declare a variable. You just need to know that you got that record, and from whatever record it found, use this field value. Okay, so 2 things that we're doing. We have the list of claims. We found the customer service queue ID. Now we've created cases for every single one of those claims, and we've said we're going to run this every night. Do we have any questions at this point before we get into the debug and activate?
I have a quick question. Will those checkboxes for that formula be unchecked, or is it because it's the next day the formula will just be unchecked because it's not today?
Correct. So the way we wrote the formula is that when today equals close date plus 14, it's checked. So when today plus 13 or today plus 15 doesn't equal today, so it won't be checked. So that's how we basically check it for the day we need it and then uncheck it for every other day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. You don't have to do cleanup.
Exactly. We don't like making more work for ourselves. That is not the goal with Salesforce admin. Okay.
Any questions specifically around that dollar record? I know that's a new concept as well. Does that make sense to everyone? That and the naming convention for the get new records, that's all new. I know in past sessions, me being kind of more of a control freak type, I like to define all of the fields and everything and control the naming of those variables. And it's been a little bit of a challenge to turn that over and let Salesforce do it all. But it is new, and I'm seeing some nice advantages of doing that. I think Michelle mentioned some there as well, but new concept, and just making sure that everybody's kind of following along with that. So if so, I won't waste any time and I'll turn it back over.
Okay. Well, now we're in for the bad news. So the bad news is you cannot debug a scheduled flow. They do not currently have any functionality available to do that because there's no way to simulate the conditions under which it's going to run. So instead, the terrible, awful, horrible, no good, very bad day way that you do this is you can recreate it as not a scheduled triggered flow and just make it like an auto launched flow, build a test record, and run through the same automation steps. But you can't actually debug from here. So if I were to click the debug button in my flow that is a scheduled flow, it's going to basically tell me you can't do this because I don't have any inputs to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing this over. So usually for a record triggered flow or something from process builder, you have that record ID that you're passing over. And so I can go over here and go, oh, well, my record ID is right here. Let me copy this and paste it. But there's nowhere for it to go because the $ record is a system variable that I don't get to control or touch. So the heartbreaking and hopefully soon to be resolved plan for debugging is basically you get to turn this on in your sandbox, set up some test records so it runs, and wait until tomorrow. So yeah, that is unfortunately the challenge with using scheduled flows. And I can definitely tell you that it's been that way. I did it last week, but it's so exciting when you get into work the next morning and you go check your records in Salesforce and go, look, it worked, I have records, yay, I'm so excited. So as far as activating your flow, once you have done this and you're ready to set up those test records, you come over here and you click this beautiful little activate button that, since we've done this already, is grayed out. You can't reactivate what's already active. Wait a minute, why do you say you're inactive then?
Try saving it.
First.
I think I made a change. That
Yeah.
might be what happened. There we go. So now that beautiful button is not grayed out and I can click it, and guess what I'm about to do? I'm gonna click activate. All right, so then you can deactivate it from here as well once you're into the flow. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go jump in here into this particular claim, and this is one where the close date was 9/1, so it was 2 weeks ago. So if I click over here on related, This is going to run tonight at 11 o'clock. And so if we were to look at this tomorrow, we would have a created case for this. So what we're going to do instead to show this is we have some from yesterday, or not yesterday, 2 days before that, which should have run 2 days ago. So if I come in here and I look at this particular claim, we do have a case. We can see that the customer service team Q is the case owner. We can see that the type is a claim follow-up and the subject is also claim follow-up. So we've done all of the things that we need to do for this to run, and it did run successfully 2 days ago. So fortunately, this is kind of a nice, easy one. Not a lot to it, but it's very powerful stuff so that you don't have to go in and, you know, click a button to run this on some specific schedule or figure out how to trigger a record change so that Process Builder or Flow can run. You can actually set it on some sort of a time schedule to just run whether the record has changed or not. That's probably my favorite thing about this is I don't actually have to find that trigger event. I can just schedule it.
So Michelle, if you go over to setup and go to the scheduled jobs, and let's see if it's got them scheduled out there.
That's my exact question, Terry, is if you could see it in like time-based workflow or, okay, so this is where you find it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see there that it has not ran yet, but it is scheduled to run. What time is that? I've got it a little bit small, but yeah, looks like tomorrow morning.
It's going to run
it is.
tonight
at
9 p.m., which actually leads me to one of the other things that we wanted to talk about. And so for that, I'm going to go to company information. Because our default time zone is Central Time, obviously. And we said we wanted this to run at 11 p.m. So can anybody tell me why, if I go look at that scheduled job, it says it's going to run at 9 p.m.
Is that the GMT time?
Not quite. And Terry, I'm going to go look at your user too, just for fun.
Yeah. I suspect that my time zone's not right. Yeah, and it's not specific.
Yep. So it's showing in the scheduled jobs in the time zone of the user. And if the time zone of the user is different than the time zone of the company, it translates that in the scheduled jobs queue. So that is definitely something for you to take a look at, especially if you've got people in different time zones and things are looking a little wonky. Because again, we said 11 o'clock, but 11 o'clock our time is 9 o'clock Terry's time, since Terry apparently is moving to the West Coast.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to tell you.
You are so not allowed. But yeah, there are a couple of different things that you could read through and help if you're interested in learning more. And Terry, I don't know if you post these anywhere.
I'll have it on the YouTube channel with links for everything we've talked about.
Okay, so this first one that you can look at is scheduled triggers for flows that run for batches of records. And basically what this is saying you can set a schedule and set a list of records that this should apply to, and it will run in batches. And then this related topic that it wants you to look at is considerations. And so this is some of the things that we talked about, like the start time field value is based on the org's default time zone. So if Terry's user is different, it's based on what the org is on. There are certain permissions someone has to have to activate this, which granted, if you're building flows, you should be an admin that has this permission anyway. There's a max number of scheduled flow interviews. The great thing is it's number of user licenses times 200. So as long as you are maxing out more than 200 records per user, you should be good. And so there's a few other things in here. The one thing to note, and I thought this was really interesting, if you delete that scheduled flow from the scheduled job page and setup that we just showed you, it deletes every future recurrence whatsoever. So not just the one that runs today and then tomorrow it picks it back up. You're obliterating it forever. To get around that, you have to deactivate and reactivate it, and it'll go back into that scheduled job. But essentially what it's doing is it's queuing up today's scheduled job and every job behind it in line. It just doesn't show you that because it would be an infinite list. So when you delete it, it's like if you delete a meeting in Outlook, you're not deleting this recurrence, you're deleting the series. So you would have to go back then and reset up that series. So these are some good things just to kind of keep yourself honest on how you're setting these up, or to understand why it may not be running the way you necessarily think it would. Again, based on things like time zones and that scheduled job little gotcha here.
Any other questions that anyone has?
Yep, Carissa actually, she had a really good suggestion that I'm stealing, by the way.
Yes.
Testing scheduled flows, set the scheduled time to 15 minutes in the future from when you're updating it. And then you don't actually have to wait until the next day to see if your results happen, because you can just wait 15 minutes. But the rule still applies. You can't use the debug button for that, and that makes me very, very sad. And you also can't set it to rollback mode, which is really nice, because when you're debugging things, you know, the old way, you know, you can click that rollback button and it'll do everything, and then it'll undo it. So your org isn't permanently changed as a result of running that flow. So yeah, you are actually putting it out in the wild to do its thing for reals. So this is why we always develop in sandboxes and dev orgs.
We always do that, right?
Always.
Always.
Especially this morning.
All right, this is a fairly short one, so you've got plenty of time. Any other flow questions that have you stumped or you'd like to ask, whether it's related to this particular flow or just a flow that you're working on that you have questions with?
Yeah, we'll play Stump the Expert and we'll put Terry on the hot seat.
No, I was going to just defer to Clarissa.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. I have a game plan for this type of thing. She is much smarter with flow than I am.
Man, Terry, you're throwing down the gauntlet.
You've built a lot more than I have, I'm sure. It's all good. So yes, try to stump us. You've got some experts here on the call. So if you're running into something that you're not sure quite how to handle with flow, feel free to ask the question. You can post it in the chat window as well if you're a little bit shy to unmute yourself. That would be fine.
Yep, and I don't know if we've talked about this before, but there's a great site that's curated by Alex Edelstein, who is the Flow products manager. So while this is unofficial, I mean, the guy who runs it works for Salesforce, and he and a bunch of the MVPs have gotten together to do this, and you'd be amazed how many things on this page become official Salesforce functionality in a release or two. So if you haven't, and there's a lot of things that you're trying to do, there's a lot of great components in here, things that you can put on screen to do different things, actions that you can do that you wouldn't be able to use Flow for before. Really is making it an awesome alternative to Apex. So I threw that link in the chat as well if anybody's interested, but it also helps with some more beginner tutorials and how-to guides on Flow. So if you need more than what Terry has so amply provided, there's some good stuff here as well. But with that, I see Brittany has a question. So what you got, Brittany?
I can totally wait if someone has a more relevant question. This is a hard ball.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have an auto-launched flow from a process. And the flow counts like the number of leads consumed for a rep. Okay, so we're monitoring the volume that reps are taking from this Shark Tank kind of queue, okay? So reps are functioning in the Shark Tank queue and they're consuming leads throughout their day. And the rep is working on the lead and trying to put it in their name, but there's a validation rule that says you can only have so many leads per day. Okay, so we don't get reps that are too greedy. So the rep's working the lead and the automation is starting from a process and then to a flow. Because the rep's working on the lead and the automation's all about the lead, but the validation rule, it's like on the user object, the rep gets this really nasty error message when they've gone over their daily limit. They don't actually get the nice validation rule error message that I wrote on the user object because it's different objects involved. So what I want to do is understand how I could provide a more helpful error message that says like you've gone over your limit, because that's what it actually is on the validation rule.
So are you able to translate what that validation rule is doing and add that to your flow?
I don't know how to do that. Like, how would I do that?
So I think it depends on where in the flow the error is getting hit, and it's probably in either the update record step when it goes to the database and it says, I want to change the owner of this record from whatever it was to my name, and it hits that step, and that's where they get that nasty error. Is that sounding right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I wish that I could just show them the validation rule error message, but I don't know how.
So what we do is we go back to, I think it was number 3 we did this on, Terry?
Might have been. I'm sure we've got it in one of these.
We created a fault. So the fault path means that you have triggered something wrong. And so then what we did is we actually set the error message for that fault and displayed it in a screen. So this is how you can handle that instead of because flow is stupid. If you don't tell it what to do, it just stops doing anything. Or it gives you this really nasty error that basically goes, I don't know what you want me to do. I quit. I'm going home. See you later. And so what we want to do is we want to make that a little more graceful and say, okay, flow, if you get a problem, don't throw your hands up and say, I'm out, see you tomorrow. Instead, go down this path and tell the user what they did wrong, please. And this is how you tell what they did wrong. So what we do is we have an assignment here where we assign the contact, or the error message in this case is for the contact. And so we've actually just put it in a variable, and you could probably put this in a constant, it depends. Okay, yep. So we did it actually as a formula. So we did it as a formula because this is written in a custom setting, or custom label, sorry. So that it was easier to create and manage and modify. So we're going several steps back here, but essentially what we did is we built an error message in a custom label to handle this particular problem. And then if you encounter it in this flow, find the appropriate label, put that into a formula, and then show that on the screen. And so you're showing them a nice error message instead of a naughty error message, essentially.
So do I need to rebuild the auto launch flow as a screen flow?
Oh, that's a problem.
That's my dilemma, yes.
Could you do it as like a notification for the user instead of a screen?
Yeah, I think you might be able to use the notification builder. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what you would do within the flow itself. And this is where we're going to go back to unofficial home, because I don't know if there's an action
I'm sure they have some.
Hi, this is Girish. Actually, we have the same business case where we also have reps pulling the leads, and we call it as agent limits. We have set these limits on a contact object, which is a user record for the rep and the contact on that user record. So we also use I think we use the screen flows, and we use the fault method to show it on the screen once. Let's say on a contact record, the limit has been set to 3. And now the rep has pulled 3 leads, and now he's trying to pull the 4th one. So we show it on the screen saying that you are above the limits, and you can, again, this can be managed by his supervisor. He can set those limits.
Mm-hmm.
So we show the message saying that please contact your supervisor if you want more leads to be pulled. But the way it works is we have set those limits on the contact, and the flow handles that. It checks the limits
Checks the limits
when
before. Yeah.
when you do an accept, right? Like next stage in the lead from a prospect to a next stage, like accept. So that's when this flow gets triggered. And then it checks for that limits. And if he is over the limits, then it shows a message on the screen at the top of the screen using the screen flow.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. That would be a good alternative. But it would require it to be a screen flow with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So Michelle, you're going to show toast here. That's an interesting. Will that run? Well, I'll let you explain it before I'll be quiet.
So this is an action. So an action does not require that this is a screen flow. If you've ever created a new record, you know how it pops up that little green box at the top that says, you know, blah, blah, record, whatever you named it has been created.
Yes.
That's a toast message. It pops up like toast out of a toaster, and then generally it fades away, which hopefully doesn't happen to your toast. I'd prefer to eat mine. But essentially that's what it's doing is if you do something like this with Apex, you can actually display an error message on a page if you write it in Apex. Don't ask me how, that's way beyond me, but I've seen it done and it's kind of cool. So instead they have this action where behind the scenes, what it's doing is it's the Apex that they use to pop that error message on the screen. So you can use a show toast that would show up in the middle of your auto launch flow running on that page to say, hey, you've encountered a problem. This is what the problem actually is.
So in the next month, when we run through, or Clarissa is going to take us through a couple different components that we will install from unofficial SF. So if this is something that's of interest to you, definitely come to the next session, because Clarissa is going to be all over how to bring these things into your flow and leverage them. So some really, really powerful things that extends the capabilities of what we can do natively in flow.
So yeah, some of these are my absolute favorite. Like if you create a new record in a flow and you want to navigate them to it, you can navigate them to pretty much anywhere in Salesforce. Yeah. And you can decide if it opens in view or in edit mode. So they don't even have to have an extra click to get from view mode to edit mode if they need to edit the newly created record. So totally cool stuff on this page, gotta say.
It is a lifesaver.
Plus, I mean, you can play sounds, and who doesn't want that?
Is there confetti? You know, because that's important.
You know, I think we probably have to.
Probably do. I'm sure it's there. All right. Any other questions?
Oh my gosh, it's right there.
Right there. Yep. Yep. Any other questions that anyone has related to flow? If not, I will take over the screen, and our next large group meeting is scheduled for October 29th. This is tentative, but I believe I'm just waiting for a final confirmation from Steve Mullis. He will be our guest presenter, and if you don't know Steve, you probably have never asked a question on the Salesforce community sites before. He answers 1,000 of these things. I'm not sure exactly how he gets it done all in a day, but he has a session on creating formulas that is absolutely fantastic. And so he, crossing my fingers, will be our presenter on our large group meeting next October 29th. So hopefully you're able to join that. And if you have no other questions, thank you, Michelle. Really, again, I appreciate you jumping in and helping us out today. And we will be back with another Let's Get Flowing sometime next month. I forget what the date is, but we'll be looking further into those unofficial FX components and adding those into your flows.